another fabulous edition of Ottawa Book Expo podcast. We have an amazing guest today, Dr. Mara Karpel, to talk about her fabulous new book. And take it away, Santosh.
Dr. Mara Karpel is a clinical psychologist, speaker, author of the international bestseller, The Passionate Life, Creating Vitality and Joy at Any Age, which was published in 2018 and just recently launched on Audible. Dr. Mara is also the host of the internet radio show, Dr. Mara Karpel and Your Golden Years, which airs weekly on Blog Talk Radio. She's been named the Passionate Living Motivator for the organization, Compassionate Austin, and she's a contributing blogger to Thrive Global, Huffington Post, Sivana East, and Medium. Dr. Mara has been working with adults of all ages for over 30 years and has specialized at working with seniors, caregivers, and veterans. You can learn more about her at drmarakarpel.com. And Dr. Karpel, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the show.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here today.
So thank you very much again. Also, Dr. Mara Karpel, from all of us here at Ottawa Book Expo. We're excited to learn about your new book, The Passionate Life, Creating Vitality and Joy at Any Age. When I had looked over this over the book, one thing that was really excited me is that not only does this book have sort of implications for individuals and having a more sort of a joyful, enriching, self-affirming life, but it also has implications for society. So we're definitely going to get into that later in the interview. But could you elaborate a little bit more on your sort of a background as a psychologist? And I also have learned that you also are interested in yoga and spirituality. So could you elaborate more on your sort of a background, Dr. Karpel?
Okay, sure. Well, as was mentioned, I've been a psychologist for over 30 years. And my specialty has been in working with older adults and caregivers. And the last few years, I've been evaluating veterans for service-connected mental health conditions. And one of the things that I noticed throughout all of these groups that I've worked with, whether they're young adults, very elderly, I've worked with people that were even 102 years old doing psychotherapy, veterans, non-veterans. I've worked in New York City, and I've worked in upstate New York. I've worked in Austin. I've worked down in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas near the Mexico border. So many different populations in terms of their socioeconomic status, occupations, race, religion, age. And the one factor that the common denominator that I found in all of these groups was that everybody wants to have a feeling of purpose and meaning in their lives. So that was, I could look back and see that was the path that I took in coming to this point that I am in my life. I began as a psychologist, having achieved a dream that I had since I was 19. I started graduate school actually looking to become an engineer, but it wasn't really a dream. It was just because in 1980, that was a big opportunity for women to enter the field of engineering. And my dad was an engineer, and he said, why don't you do that? And I was like, okay, like any, most 18-year-olds do when they enter college, just go for whatever seems the easiest. And I realized I didn't like it. It wasn't my dream. And so I was searching, and a friend of mine in my dorm recommended that I interview for a peer counseling center. She saw signs to interview, and I went through that training and became a peer counselor because it felt right. And the first and only client that I had was suicidal. And I had been trained not as a counselor as a therapist, but as a counselor, to keep the person from committing suicide, to evaluate if they were suicidal, and then bring them over to the health center for more help. So it took about 2 hours to convince him to do that. And at that moment, I knew that I had found my calling. I decided I was going all the way to become a psychologist. So I became a psychologist. And when I got there and I had achieved this dream, I realized that there was something more. And it kept waking me up in the middle of the night like this. My soul was whispering to me, there's something more that you need to do to help people. I always wanted to help people in some way, but something was missing. And so that's when I started on that path of searching. Started doing yoga. I had done yoga before, but I became more interested in yoga. I started on a more spiritual path, studying Buddhism, shamanism, just really kind of opening myself up, doing more artwork, drawing, painting. And even though those were not the things that were my passion, the way that I was going to help the world, they opened me up. So I'm still interested in those things, but they're not my career. But those paths opened me up to being more curious about what was out there. And that opening led to me moving to Austin, Texas from New York, where I felt really confined by the financial difficulties of living in the New York City area, where I really couldn't take risks because of the money. I had to really work all the time to be able to afford to pay my rent and the phone bill in the same month. So I got to Austin and I was offered the opportunity to start a radio show. And that really became my passion. I realized that I love doing the show. I love meeting interesting guests and asking questions about books that they've written. I mean, I'm sure you guys get that feeling where you have the opportunity to ask the question of an author where you enjoyed the book, and it's like, wow, I get to talk to this author and ask them a question. And I learned so much from all the different expert guests that I've had on my show that I decided to start writing about it, and discovered that was also a passion of mine, writing and using that as a therapy for myself along my own path. And along the way, my father passed away during the writing of the book, and my writing completely changed. I ended up going back and rewriting everything I had already written at that point, because my writing became much more raw and authentic. And I felt that every chapter was a way for me to work out something that some challenge or conflict that I was dealing with. And my responsibility to the reader was to come to a conclusion at the end that could be helpful to them. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, it definitely answered the question. So you wrote your book as a part of an introspection spiritually, and as well to connect with others who might be going through the same things, to inspire them to have a more sort of purposeful life?
Exactly. And as you mentioned, there's a spiritual, it's mind, body, and spirit, because I was also on a health journey at the same time, changing my own diet to eat more healthy food, exercising, meditating, and all of that is included in the book.
So was the significant event that became part of your book, was it your passing away of your father, and were there other events as well, or primarily that event?
Well, that was the biggest one for sure. Along the way was also the caregiving of my parents as they were getting older, and I was now a long distance caregiver because they were back in New York. And so all of the help that I'd given to other caregivers now was becoming a reality for myself, that I had to utilize my own advice and also be able to stay grounded and healthy and not become sick from the stress of that. So that was also a part of it. But I would definitely say that my father's passing and the issues that went along with that were the most significant event that happened during that time.
In terms of passion, because your book focuses on the passionate life, and so I'm sure that your sort of title, is a very intriguing, well thought out title. So what is the importance of passion in the book? Because some people have different senses of passion. Listeners and viewers, some may think passion is love, or some people may think it's the dedication. So how would you define passion, and what is this important in our daily lives?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. My definition of passion has evolved over time since I started writing the book until now. I think that passion is something most people think of as something that you really love to do. And I think that's a part of it, but it's not the only part of it. And you brought up in the introduction about how it's also related to the community and the world. So it has really evolved, especially with all of the things that have been going on in the world that have always been there, but have been much more visible in the past few years. And I think that passion really has to include not only finding what we love to do, but bringing our gifts to the world in some way, using what we have to help bring joy to the world. And that can look different. Like I said, I work with all different populations. So what a 35-year-old can do to find joy and also create joy in the world is going to be different than a 102-year-old. But I think the common thing is the really feeling enthusiastic about it, feeling like this is the reason that I'm going to get up today, at the same time as using that to help other people. So if it's painting or drawing or something artistic like that, using that to inspire other people as well. The passion is not just keeping it to yourself, but sharing it.
And does your book have a certain particular resonance in terms of how our experiences as society and as societies and coming out of the pandemic? Because I've noticed that, there are a lot of people, the pandemic, contribute to a lot of mental illness and people feeling alienated and some people losing their job and a lot of anger and people taking very certain positions which are not listening to each other. So how does your book relate to our sort of collective experiences of dealing with the pandemic in terms of passion? Those people may feel that they've lost their passion and they're just feeling pressured and angst and they don't know what to do.
Absolutely. I've spoken about this quite a bit on my show, which, the book came out before the pandemic, but really a lot of people had been telling me that they had been following their passion and now it was completely blocked because of not being able to do the things that help their passion along, not being able to do public speaking or performing or interacting with other people. And also, as you said, the stress of it and having to really focus on, somehow putting food on the table takes away from the ability to follow a passion. But what I really came to see was that sometimes, obstacles are a part of life. It's part of the journey that we're going to hit obstacles, whether it's our own personal obstacle, like a death of a loved one, or having to take care of somebody who's ill, or a global obstacle, such as the pandemic. But they are always there on our journey. And that is in the book, how to get back on track after we hit an obstacle, how to get through it. But the other thing that I noticed is that passions can change for the time. You have to be flexible. That's a big part of it. We're not necessarily going to be on the same path that we thought we were starting out on. It's going to change. It's going to take big turns. And if we can find something in that moment that can be beneficial for society and that brings us joy, even if you're stuck in your house and you can't see other people, then that can be our passion. And maybe that's just our passion for that moment in time. Or maybe that's something new that people discover, that, hey, this is something that I'm going to carry on into the future, even when we're able to get out and interact with each other. So, volunteering to help people who are without food, for example, that was a big thing that people maybe a lot of people who did that hadn't ever thought of doing that, but now they had all this free time and they saw that people were struggling to put food on the table and they started volunteering, and maybe that becomes their passion, or maybe that's their passion right now, or reaching out to other people who are stuck at home and isolated and giving them that social connection, calling them, finding a way to interact with them on Zoom or Skype or some other social media. Or now that people are vaccinated and we do have tools that we could use, such as masks, maybe visiting people who are stuck at home. So again, our passion can change. If we're stuck in one outcome, then we're going to be frustrated and we're going to lose our passion, because outcomes are very rarely what we expect them to be. So it's finding, well, how can I use this now to turn it into a passion? How can I use the situation to create passion and meaning?
You have a question, Santosh, a perspective on passion?
Oh, well, it's very interesting what you said, like, especially about the passions changing. So sometimes we have to also be realistic as well. Like, not everybody is going to become, like, say your passion is in music. You want to become a rock star. I mean, that's a very competitive field, but you can still do something in music. That's maybe also puts, financially makes you stable as well. So is that something that's part of your book?
Absolutely. A big part of it is that the joy is in the journey.
Yes.
And so if we hold on, and that's a Buddhist concept, to not hold on tight to outcomes.
Yeah.
If we hold on to the outcome and we have to achieve that goal, then we're not enjoying the journey.
The process, yes.
The process. And we may never achieve that goal, but if we enjoy every part of the process, then we've had passion, we've enjoyed the journey. So yes, being realistic is important, and being able to bend with what comes before us. That's all really important. Flexibility. Mm-hmm.
So one thing I wanted to ask about, Dr. Karpel, is I have a background in social psychology, and when I saw your 4 pillars, I was quite excited, because I think that, at least in my view, I definitely wanted to get your perspective as well. When you talk about the 4 pillars of gratitude being one, compassion, living out our dreams, and generosity, isn't there sort of an implication for this, not only for ourselves as individuals, but as society as well? Because I think that there are a lot of, social activists, policymakers, groups that this book could have an implication for them, because I think that there's a lot of these pillars, particularly since the pandemic, that people are not necessarily paying attention to, that's creating a lot of problems in our society.
I absolutely agree. Yes, the 4 pillars. So allowing yourself to dream. And that's something that people give up a lot of times as they become adults. They think that's for children. I'm not, I don't have time for dreams and fantasies. And being curious about what we can do to enjoy. Having gratitude for what we already have, not looking to follow a dream or a passion because we're desperate, but looking to follow a passion out of inspiration. And then I think the two things that you're getting to are compassion and what was the other one? Generosity?
Yeah, compassion and generosity, because one of the things which I noticed, I also want to get your expert perspective. One of the things which I noticed that after 9/11, there was that outpouring of empathy. I heard that online dating, people got more interested in relationships, community, sympathy. But after this particular pandemic, which is maybe a different type of crisis, I noticed that the exact opposite. I noticed in one of your interviews, you talk about trolling. I just find that relative to 9/11, the outcome of this pandemic is more of a sort of a mean-spirited. People are sort of, just my opinion, more self-absorbed. They're not so generous, and it just to me disturbing. And then I see this in particular United States, but you're starting to see in Canada more sort of some poverty, and you have all these tent cities. And one of the things which I'm concerned about as a species is that you see in video on YouTube, you see people abandon dogs, you see cats, people taking them in their home. I've not seen, there might be, but I've seen few, if any, YouTube videos about somebody who's homeless or somebody doing something generous for them. And because of this, as a society, we're having more disparity, dislocation. So as a society, since the pandemic, do you have any observations in terms of our sort of sense of tolerance and how social media have all this more trolling? And it seems to be a less generous in societies that we've kind of emerged from than we went into before the pandemic.
I have a lot of observations about that, and you must have been listening into my brain because it's very, very disturbing. And that's why on my show, I've increased the amount that I speak about compassion and generosity. I really can't speak for the social science of why this is happening, although I have listened to a lot of social scientists, especially I forgot his name, the one who's very involved in looking at social media and how that affects society. He talks about social media being one of the culprits. That there are algorithms that steer people towards one group or the other, and they only hear the opinions of that group. So that it's kind of like we're all speaking in echo chambers, and it amplifies any anger that we might already have to see ourselves as it's us against them. So I think that's part of it. But I have absolutely seen the lack of compassion and generosity. Although some people I've seen it increase where they felt like, wow, I really want to do something to help. And I have seen, people volunteer when they weren't volunteering before to help people. But I talk a lot on my show about how you really cannot have passion without compassion. It's really a very important factor, because if you're only looking at what you like to do, this is what I like to do, so I'm just going to keep doing it, without looking at also helping other people, then it's not sustainable, because there's going to be a time when you don't feel like doing that, where you don't feel well, or you're tired, or you're burnt out, and you're not going to get out of bed in the morning to go do the thing that you said that you love to do. But when there are other people who are depending on you to do that, when you know that you're making a difference in other people's lives by doing this thing that you do, that's the motivator to get you out of bed. So that's the selfish part of it, that having compassion for other people actually increases our own ability to follow our passion. But also, it's, as you talked about it, if we don't have compassion and we don't have generosity, then we live in an angrier and angrier world. And that also makes it difficult to enjoy life and enjoy passion. It goes both ways. If we're not going to be compassionate and generous, it's not going to come back to us either. And it makes life harder and harder. Compassion and generosity are both been found in the research, and I talk about some of the research findings in my book. They both have been found to improve mood and increase our immunity to disease. Actually, doing compassionate acts, which that's the generosity. Compassion is the feeling, so the generosity is what it motivates us to do. By actually doing compassionate acts of generosity, it increases our immunoglobulin A, which is the natural immune booster in our body. It increases our endorphins, which are those natural neurotransmitter or the chemicals that make us feel good and that decrease pain and help sleep. And it increases serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that decreases depression and increases sleep. So all of those things come back to us to help us to live a more joyful, passionate life. But on the wider scale, helping the world, it just feels good. Like there was a quote, I think it was Pete Seeger, who said, "Do good things just because it feels good. Just because it's good. No, just because it's good to do them."
Yes. No, without expecting any results or outcomes, just do things.
Absolutely. In fact, the research, the psychological research has found that when we have expectations of something in return for our generosity, it takes away all benefit to us acting generously. So if we give money to somebody on the street, for example, we say, wow, that person looks like they could use our help. We give them some money. Mm-hmm. It feels good. Like, well, maybe they'll eat a warm meal today. But if we go and follow that person to see if that's what they're spending money on, that they didn't go into the liquor store instead, we don't get that benefit. We don't get feel good feeling.
So it's part of so in terms of reading your book, it's a part of living a healthy lifestyle, being attuned to your own mental psyche and how it influences your body. Because I think a lot of people, they get focused on exercise and health as just as maybe eating right or going to the gym, but they don't look at how their mental state and how they interact with others and how they think of themselves, how all those psychological factors have a critical impact on how their body reacts and whether they're healthy or not.
Absolutely. It's all connected. So how we eat can affect our mood. If we eat a lot of sugar and we don't eat a lot of good food like fruits and vegetables, it can actually cause depression. Mm-hmm. If we don't exercise, our bodies are made to move. So if we don't move every day, it can cause depression. That's an actual direct effect. And then, of course, there's the other effects of diabetes, and then we become depressed about that. If we don't get enough sleep, it could cause depression. But on the other side of that, our mood affects our health. So people who have more passion and joy in their life tend to live longer lives. And that is definitely shown in the research. And as I said, it causes a boost of your immune system. It decreases pain because of the endorphins. So all of that's really, really important for our physical wellness.
I think one of the another important reasons why readers out there have to buy and get your book is how to sort of internalize those 4 pillars of gratitude, compassion, living out our dreams, and generosity. Because one of the points which I believe you had mentioned in a previous interview is in terms of having a higher mission, helping others, not just ourselves, in terms of living out our dreams. Because I think that one of the big problems that we're having as a society is that, in terms of the four pillars, is that we have an imbalance. We have people and society not paying enough attention to gratitude, compassion, and generosity. And you have people living out their dreams, not for this higher purpose, but for selfishness, like they're living out their dreams and they don't care about poor people. They don't care about this group. They're just in a sort of a narcissistic, self-absorbed mentality that is creating destruction, because we have a lot of people which are trying to live out their dreams with no generosity, no compassion or gratitude. They are in a state of a sort of a war with each other as individuals, and it translates in terms of what's going on in society and stuff like that. Even like war situations where we're having in Ukraine. One of the things which disturbs me about that, compared to in the 1960s, when I think that these type of values were much more a part of society, there was a lot more conversation, I believe, in the 60s, for example, in terms of how the Vietnam War is affecting and destroying the lives of the people who are in the Vietnamese. Whereas in this particular war in Ukrainian conflict, where some people are saying that we're on the brink of World War III, I don't find that there's enough conversation about how the war coming from both sides is affecting the daily lives of people getting killed in the street. It's just as, I'm this side, I'm that side, and stuff like that. And you have all these people doing their own thing. I'm going to buy my car. I don't care about it.
I'm going to put this flag up.
Comment about people living out their dreams, but not within the sort of higher dimensional purpose and how it affects us as society and as individuals?
Well, I try to touch on that in this book, and I think that what you're talking about, because so much of this has occurred since I started, since I published this book, I've ended up talking about all of that on my show. In fact, I had a Russian American woman on my program who is a musician here in the United States, from Russia, but very, very much on the side of Ukrainians. That's where a lot of her family and friends live. And she came on the show. We did a whole show where she talked about, it had just happened. Russia had just invaded Ukraine. And she came on the program to talk about the devastation of Ukrainian people and what she was hoping wouldn't happen, which did happen. And I think you make a very good point, and I do talk about this in a way that maybe people who are feeling like, why should I do that? Why should I care about other people? I try to bring it back to, well, because it will affect you. At some point, it will affect you. So maybe that if you don't have that feeling like I should do it just because it's a good thing to do, then maybe you should help other people because it's going to affect you at some point. But I would love to, go deeper into that, maybe with a social scientist to talk about why on a larger level, since I, as a psychologist, clinical psychologist, I deal with the individual, maybe to discuss why this is happening and how, what can we do to change that? Because I'm in totally agreement with you. And I try to make that point in here about compassion and generosity. But I do think it has really escalated in the last couple of years.
Does your book also sort of explore, situations of people who are trying to, for example, live lives that embrace gratitude, but are in relationships or in environments that are sort of working against that? Because I find, for example, if you're in a relationship and you're sort of thankful and you're in a state of gratitude, then there's pressures for you to always know, I got to buy a new car, I got to do this, I got to buy bigger and better all the time. And if I don't do that, my wife or my girlfriend or my boyfriend or whatever, they're going to look at me as it's going to affect my relationship and threaten it if I don't constantly try to, do more. And, so your sort of book deals with the sort of the social pressures that people trying to embrace the values in your book, but are in sort of situations that they feel pressure that they have to go against that.
Yes. Well, I do talk about relationships and healthy relationships versus unhealthy relationships and how to navigate that, and as well as dealing with critics. Many times I wouldn't say many times, anytime people start a new path, following some new way of living, but I want to eat healthier, I want to start exercising, I want to start using my artistic talents, I want to start helping people and giving back, or whatever it is, there will always be critics. And very often, many of those critics are people that we're very close to. They're not just trolls on social media. Those are going to be there. They're going to be critics out in the world that will criticize you and call you names and all kinds of things. But even our closest friends and family and significant others will criticize us in some way or question it. And that comes from either feeling jealous, that maybe they feel jealous that you're now starting this new healthier living path or more joyful path, or they are worried that you're going to shake up the relationship and now you're going to do something different and they're not going to be as important to you, or as you said, you maybe not be able to buy them fancy cars or whatever that might be. Or they might be worried for you, think that maybe you're making a mistake and they don't want to see you make a mistake, or just they feel that if you do something different, that means that it points the finger back at themselves, that, oh no, this means that I have to make changes and I don't want to make. So all of that is going to be there. So I do talk about navigating that, how to get through that. Some of it is to say, thank you for your opinion. I'll take that under advisement and then keep going. Sometimes they might have a good point. So, maybe it's not a good idea to quit your day job to become a rock star when you have no connection to become, right? So it is, maybe it is a good idea to think about what they said, to really take it under advisement and decide whether or not this is a legitimate critique or is it just their own fear talking, and to kind of tweak our path that way. But being around positive people, being around people who support you, I recommend to people joining like-minded groups where other people maybe are following a similar path. I found that helped me when I joined. They weren't necessarily doing exactly what I was going to do, but they were on a path of living a more joyful life. And so that really helps. That inspires you. And when people are positive around you, about you, that helps to kind of be able to tune out some of the negative stuff. Because when people say negative things about you, it absolutely, not absolutely, very often will have the effect of connecting with some inner critic that you have of yourself. All your worries, all your self-sabotage is highlighted by things that other people say. So being around people who are positive about you, who notice all your good qualities and let you know, helps to kind of drown that out.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Sorry, especially like you said, it's better to, if you have something passionate about, it's better to go out and start doing it, and maybe you'll meet some people that are also like-minded along the way that will, instead of just relying on your friends or your family to support you, maybe just the act of just going out and doing it, you'll get new friends along the way that are also in to what your hobby might be. Yeah.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's part of the joy being in the journey. I'm so grateful for all the people that I met, in
along the way.
Yeah, they've become good friends. But then also intentionally seeking groups. Like there are groups that you can join, that you can, whether it's virtual or in person, where people support each other.
Yes, it's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, in terms of, for a prospective reader of your book, and somebody who's thinking, oh yeah, I want to be more passionate, and those things are important to me, and I embrace those values. How important is it for someone who wants to get full value of reading your book to have a sort of a spiritually focused frame of mind? Because when you had wrote your book, you were sort of in that state of mind where you had embraced spirituality, you were yoga, you were sort of trying to embrace a higher dimensional consciousness. Because when I'm reading these pillars, it just strikes me that someone who is spiritually introspective would be more easily be able to adopt and embrace those values than maybe someone who's, I want to be more passionate, but they're not in a spiritual state of mind. They're very sort of super materialistic. So how important is it for somebody to sort of embrace a sort of a spiritual mindset? And do you have a part of your book that sort of helps to introduce people in that frame of mind for people who may not be as connected as you were when you were starting to write your book?
I think wherever you are on your path is the perfect place to start. So it doesn't matter. Yes, people who are more in tune with that, some of this might even be information that they already know, but it's a reminder, and it has some tips because I know I need reminders all the time from other people, and ways of going about doing these things, that maybe they might learn something new. But I think somebody who's like really new at this can also benefit quite a bit, because it's pretty, it's a guide. Mm-hmm. So I wrote it as a guide.
So what are some of the new sort of projects and initiatives you're working on right now? Because you mentioned, that your fabulous radio show that you've been involved with. So what are some of the important projects that people can sort of learn about? Like, for somebody who wants to connect with you, there are opportunities to connect with you, whether they're looking for a psychologist to help them through a difficulty. Like, what are some of the projects you're working on, and what are some of the ways that people can connect with you if you're open to such connections?
Well, right now I'm not really focusing on doing psychotherapy, because I'm pretty busy. And as I mentioned, I'm doing evaluations of veterans, and that's pretty busy. And then on top of it, but I am creating a course, and that based on this book. So people it's going to be online, and it will probably be ready in the spring or early summer. So I am working with someone who knows how to create a course with my material. And then from that course, I hope to start some coaching, either group coaching or individual coaching, on living a passionate life. So that is like the big project I'm working on right now, creating the course. I also, my radio program is continuing. It's been on for almost 9 years on internet radio, Blog Talk Radio.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then 2 years before that on local Austin radio. So and the podcasts are immediate. So everything that we did online for the last 9 years is available with all the different guests. And we have a lot of guests coming up this year or into 2023. So that's a big project I'm working on. Trying to get people to find out more about this book and that it's on Audible. If a lot of people are listening on Audible rather than reading books. I notice people don't read books so much anymore. They listen. So that this is both ways. Those are the main things that I'm doing right now. And they can find out if they go to my website, which is drmarakarpel.com. So it's drmarakarpel.com. And they could also sign up for my newsletter. So when I have big things, I don't bother people very often. I don't send it out very often. So when there are big things, I'll send out an email. And another really great way to find out what is coming up, any events coming up, upcoming shows, any blogs that I write, all of that I post on my Facebook page, which is Dr. Mara Karpel, Your Golden Years. So those are probably the best ways. And they can hear all of my shows on my website. It's also on Apple Podcasts.
Awesome. So if they go to your website, they'll learn about your potential, your sort of course that you're going to be doing in the next several months. They'll learn about that. They'll get updates in terms of any special things, projects you have going on, and they'll also be able to listen to your sort of internet radio episodes.
Yes, and they can go all the way back to almost 9 years since we've been on.
Oh, I see. Okay. So it's all archived by subjects.
It's archived by date.
Dates. Okay.
That's very useful.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
So
So they're not. So if they're just learning about you now, they'll have. They'll be able to go back and catch up to to all your wisdom.
And they can read all my blogs as well. All the blogs I've written are on my website.
And it's very motivational too. Like if you're feeling a little bit like low, you can listen to your podcast and be motivated to keep going.
Yeah. And, Thank you.
Great.
And your book is available on is it Barnes and Noble, Amazon.com, any other, and Audible as well? You mentioned.
Yes. Those are the ones that I know about. I know it went out to a bunch of online booksellers.
Okay, we got to make sure that people, if they do a Google search of The Passionate Life, Creating Vitality and Joy at Any Age, they should be able to, get the links on Google of where easiest they want to buy your books. You just have to make sure they type in that title or your name, Dr. Mara Karpel, with the book, and they will definitely be able to link and get your title that way. Are you thinking of a subsequent book in the making or works you're thinking about?
Yes, when I have the time. But you brought up some great topics that I have written blogs about. So those are areas that I'd like to write about. Going more into compassion and generosity and how that is helpful to the world.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's what definitely. It's both have applications for the individual to be more healthy, purposeful life with joy at any age. Because I think some people, some young people think that, I get 30s, 40s, or 50s or whatever, and lose the passion. And you can have passion and joy is any age. It's a healthy approach.
It's never too late. Yeah.
Well, I write about that actually to start off the book, about how people feel that, I've done everything and I've raised my family, I've done my career, I'm retiring, now what?
Yeah.
And that's really a time where you can say, okay, well, what do you really want to do?
Yeah. One of the inspiring documentaries that I saw a while back was Frank Lloyd Wright. He was most productive, I think, is in his 60s or 70s. That's when he did all this fabulous architecture. He became well known about, not when he was in his 20s and 30s,
Yeah.
but when he was like a senior citizen.
Even
Well,
like KFC, the owner of KFC started in his late 50s, I believe. Colonel Sanders, and then and now look where he is. The legacy, it's amazing. Yeah, sorry.
Well, in graduate school, my research, I did research for my doctorate and for my master's degree. My master's degree research was about older experts versus younger novices. And people tend to think that older people lose their capacity because their memory might not be as good, and that's normal to lose some short-term memory. But the older people tend to be much, much better at looking at the bigger picture because they have more experience. So it's based on experience, and they are much better at doing the work. So it's really opposite of what most people think. Experience makes a difference. I mean, that's, wisdom. We've kind of lost that in our culture. Everybody's looking to youth to do everything, and both are contributors. Youth contribute important pieces of the puzzle, but you can't put older people out to pasture either.
That's very true.
Youth have, perhaps the energy, but the older people have the wisdom and experience. And I think that, we've lost a sort of a cross-generational conversations, and in terms of how the society has put a value on just the young workforce and, and putting older people out to pasture. We're losing that wisdom in society. And I think that a lot of problems we're having in the society is because the older, experienced people are not being included, in terms of the wisdom, in terms of how the youth are, in terms of individuals, and how they contribute to workplaces and people in general. I think that is causing a lot of social dysfunctions today. That's just my opinion.
It causes social dysfunction, and we're also losing such an important resource. Older people are really an important, and I mean, that was why I was interested in working with older adults to begin with, because their experiences are so rich, and their stories, and they, when we learn about history, they were there. They were experiencing history. They didn't just read a book. They experienced it. So I think it's important that we don't lose that resource, that we really utilize the wisdom that older people have to offer. It's good for them because they feel more purposeful, but it's really good for society in general. It's good for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that, definitely your book is a good counter to what, in my view, is a growing sort of ageism. And, there's a lack of institutions. I mean, there's a lot of isms out there, racism, homo, and all sorts of other type of isms. But ageism, I think there's not enough defense about how that is causing a lot of problems in society. There's prejudice against older people and stuff. I mean, to me, it's just bad. And in terms of the pandemic sort of raised the problem of ageism, because you saw how people who are just being condemned in these terrible conditions in these facilities where they were being neglected, and it's just like terrible how you're treating old people and stuff like that. There's lack of public health and just terrible, that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, what really shocked me during the pandemic was hearing that, okay, well, this is only dangerous to old people, so we should all be out there spreading it around. We're not going to get sick. Put the old people away, and that was kind of similar to the language. I've heard politicians say that, speaking for old people, and say elderly people, not old people, but elderly people.
Elderly.
But I mean, that was kind of the language that, they're willing to sacrifice their lives for us to make money. And there was a lot of pushback, thankfully, where a lot of seniors came back and said, speak for yourself.
Yeah.
So, but that was, the reason I wrote this book Creating Vitality and Joy at Any Age, the second part of this title, The Passionate Life, is because there really aren't many books out there for people who are in this time of life, other than like health books and, that kind of thing. Nothing about just all the books about following a joyful path are written for younger people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's interesting.
I think this book would be sort of great reading in many sort of high schools and university classrooms as well, to sort of open up a conversation about passion and joy and importance on society for whether they're sort of psychology courses and other courses which have a sort of implications of associated with social psychology. So this is definitely a fantastic book for individuals, for us as a society, and for from a pedagogical perspective in terms of teaching.
Yeah, thank you.
So is there anything, Dr. Karpel, that you didn't get to talk about or mention that you wanted to talk about in terms of your book, and any perspective that we didn't really get to talk about in great detail?
I think we touched on everything I could think about at this moment. Of course, probably when we get off, I'll say, should have.
We should have mentioned that.
You're right.
Yeah, that's kind of happens. Kind of terrible when it happens. I mean, it's part of our sort of human psyche, but hopefully we'll keep those to a minimum.
Right. Now, in terms of finding the book, I just want to mention people can Google it to find other ways of purchasing the book. But if people are okay with buying from Amazon, it's on Amazon. And
Amazon is great.
Good.
Very reliable. They'll track your book as it goes through every little postal station until it arrives. Yeah. So definitely Amazon, is a great way. Amazon.ca, you're in Canada, Amazon.com, wherever you're in the world. They have great tracking facilities. So definitely, check out Amazon to read your book, Dr. Karpel. So
and everything is on my website as well. So.
Definitely. So definitely the website kind of gives you all that sort of background material in terms of your courses, your upcoming projects. But definitely you want to purchase your book, because then people will be much more into the fine-tuning balances of your 4 pillars and how they can have a more sort of a healthy, positive, passionate life at any age.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. So thank you very much, Dr. Karpel, for taking the time to come to us on this another amazing edition of Ottawa Book Expo podcast. And thank you, Santosh, as well, for being a part of the technical and co-interviewing team at Ottawa Book Expo.
My pleasure.
And we hope you have a wonderful day, and many people buy your books today, and that you pass a lot of, and that our society as individuals, all this wisdom starts to percolate throughout society, so that we can be a more happy society as we become a more healthy society as individuals.
Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you very much again. Awesome. Thank you.
Great having you.